Okay, great. Good morning, Jackie.
Good morning, Serretta. I see you.
Yeah, yeah, we're friends, Charley.
Oh, awesome. Then this will be perfect. Okay, yeah, and
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
not having our third panelist join us. He had a conflict, so this will work great since you guys know each other. I'll introduce myself. My name is Charley. I am the vice principal for the Success School. So I help get everything planned that we do with MCCSC and then also RBB in terms of anything that has to do with financial literacy, soft skills, entrepreneurship, career readiness, that kind of thing. And so you guys are one of the 4 or 5 panels we're doing this, like basically since last week until mid-September. So I again thank you guys for joining us this morning. And we're going to go ahead and hop right in for introductions. If you guys could just provide your name, the industry you consider yourself a part of, your employer, and then what your job title is. And I'll go ahead and start with Serretta because you were the first person to my left.
Good morning. My name is Serretta Gordon, and I am in the social work profession. I am a field educator for the IU School of Social Work. We have multiple campuses, so I'm on Bloomington's campus working with our master's level students, placing them in their field practicums for their last process of the program before they graduate.
Awesome.
Awesome. And Jackie?
Hi, everyone. You can't see me, but I'm Jackie Daniels. I am also a licensed clinical social worker. So Serretta and I have actually worked together before. I have worked in the field of addictions treatment for a very long time and currently am working as the executive director of the Indiana Center for Recovery.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, ladies. Really excited to have you guys jump into your stories about how you got here. With that in mind, I would love to hear about your overall career, what kind of led you here, what schooling did you get? Did you have other jobs before you got to this point? Just what did that path look like for you to finally end up where you are now? And either of you can start.
Well, I'll go. So social work was not something that I chose. When I talk with our field students, as well as just mentees that I work with in the community, I speak about how social work chose me. We all come to this profession with a life story, challenges, as well as triumphs and things that we become resilient in. And family struggles as well as family strengths have pushed me into this profession. I realized that my purpose was only going to be fulfilled by taking on this calling. I started out with multiple angles of degrees that I started with in college and undergrad. And through some significant life challenges, I realized that social work was really where I shined and I did well, but also it allows for an individual to do a lot of self-inventory, to explore who you are as a person. And so it allowed for me to realize that you got to be real with yourself in order to be a social worker. You really have to know yourself and you have to check in to make sure that you are in fact taking care of you before you can take care of someone else. And so I went to undergrad and then set out for a little while and did some life explorations and figured out that I really needed to check in with me, and then went back to school, finished my undergrad and went on to grad school, and then started working in the profession, working for the state of Kentucky as an actual foster care social worker in the permanency division. So there were a lot of really great experiences that I've had throughout the years, moving to Indiana about 8 years ago, and working here in the community, working with various agencies. And then eventually the IU School of Social Work decided to open a MSW program here, and facilitated talking with various individuals in the community about the position. And so I was gracefully selected and humbly accepted. And here I am going into year 5 and working with practicum students. So it's been an amazing journey.
Yay. I have a similar, is it okay if I just jump in there, Charley?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I have a similar story. with a few twists and turns. My parents are both educators, and my dad retired from Indiana University, and my mom worked for MPCSC for a long time. And so I was kind of inspired by their service to the community and their service of choice. And honestly, when I graduated from high school, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And ended up at Indiana University. And the entire time I was an undergrad, probably until the year 2000, I really thought that I was going to be a Spanish translator because I enjoyed language, I enjoyed traveling, until I realized that that meant I had to write research papers in Spanish. And decided that's not what I wanted to do. So I also took time off and took a break around the time I was supposed to graduate, and experienced some life concerns, and ended up going back. And when I went back after experiencing some life, I realized that really what I wanted to be was a clinical social worker, in part because I had been inspired by some social workers in my life, and really wanted to figure out what it was that really made them good social workers. I got my undergrad at IU and then went on to my master's program at IUPUI, got my master's in social work. And my first job was as a therapist. And I've kind of been a therapist for my entire career. However, I've always found myself in leadership positions. I think in part because I like working with people, but I also like mentoring people, and kind of finding what inspires them and helping them kind of put those visions into fruition. And also worked at IU for a little bit in prevention with college students. And I was there 7 years, and I decided that I really missed addictions treatment. So I took a job with the Indiana Center for Recovery in 2017. And before you knew it, I was in another leadership position. So that's how I've kind of ended up here. But to me, similar probably to Serretta, social work for me is an avocation. I learned that it's something that we're called to, and not necessarily something that kind of lands on us. Like she said, social work picked her, and I feel exactly the same.
Well, it's awesome to hear your guys' stories, and I think proves that you can do a lot before you finally get to what you may want to do for the rest of your life. I know I'm currently in my master's, and definitely have had those situations of what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? Spending a lot of time just trying to figure that out. And I think it's really important for high school students to hear that that is really normal, to not necessarily know what you want to do, and even get through college and still not necessarily know what you want to do. And so really loved hearing your guys' stories about that. So I think one of the big things that I think is really important to talk about also is the biggest challenges inside of your fields right now, or your industry or your job. What do you think is the biggest challenge in terms of your industry or field?
Wow.
Right.
Serretta, you have an idea?
Well, if you were to ask me pre-COVID, I would definitely say resources, and the ability to have more individuals come into the profession. In the state of Indiana, I believe it was last year, there were some news reports that came out that we were about 8,000 social workers short. And so because of that, there is a huge need for advocates, brokers, prevention specialists, therapists, licensed clinical social workers. We have a gamut, a huge role that we play throughout this profession, and we are definitely lacking in the numbers throughout each state in our country. So I would say that resources, as well as bringing individuals aware of how many different outlets there are to go into social work, because it's not just about people snatching people's kids. That is a huge myth that we hear a lot. I got it a lot when I was a DCS worker, and we know that that's not all we do, and that's not our goal in the beginning anyhow. But now that COVID has presented itself, there are a lot of challenges that we are seeing in the profession, including just being physically there to work face to face with the client because of all of the health risks that come along with the concerns of COVID-19. So I would say that just having resources and awareness are two big issues that we are trying as a school to bring to the attention of our community, and figure out how we can build relationships and build bridges with other community partners to keep the profession flowing and keep more individuals moving into social work.
Wow, that was a really good answer. I don't know if I can top that one. I would say ditto. And I would also have to say that the biggest challenge that I have found in my own career is how to utilize technology, and also utilize technology in a way that connects people as opposed to isolating people. I find that I've had to really stay up to date on what people are using in technology, not only social media, but these video game systems that people have these days, you know, to really connect with the younger population. I feel like I have a learning curve. But then I also know through this experience with COVID that technology has been, in a lot of ways, our best friend, and that has allowed us to stay in contact with people that may be isolated at home or unable to get to services in the community, which in itself is not just limited to COVID. We have people in rural areas that we have a hard time getting to for services and resources. And I would have to say, for me, it's twofold. It's, as a professional, how do I stay up to date on what's happening with technology? But then two, how do I use it in a way that connects people? Because I find too that technology sometimes can be our best and worst enemy, because it also allows us to stay isolated. And for example, on this panel, you can't see my face because I chose to turn off the camera. So you can hear my voice, but how does that allow you to feel connected to me if you can't actually see a face? So just some things I think about, but I also remember having this conversation when I was in graduate school about the need to really stay on top of what's happening with technology and using it as a tool and not so much a hindrance to the work that we do.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys point to a great point of, it really is kind of like, what is the issue pre-COVID and what's the issue like currently in COVID? I think a lot of industries are having that moment where they're like, yeah, my problems before COVID were completely different from what they are now, or they're being exasperate. Oh gosh, sorry, bad word choice. It's early in the morning. They're being kind of blown up because of COVID. You know, resources lacking already are then being even more utilized at this moment, and then making it even harder. So I think you guys make a really great point about this time right now, introducing new issues and new ideas, like you said, especially with technology and things. So great points from you both on that. And then I think on the other side, what would you say is the best part of your industry? What is your favorite thing that you get to do, or your favorite part of being in this industry?
Oh, go ahead, Jackie.
I'm just thinking that that question always makes me feel excited, because every time I'm asked it, I have a new answer. And I'd have to say right now, I feel like my profession allows me to be part of the solution and not the problem. And the problem could be a whole myriad of things. But in terms of issues like social welfare, health disparities, there's so many things that social workers get to do. And a lot of times we're asked to sit at tables where policy is being made, even in the communities where happening. For example, in Bloomington, being asked to sit on community groups talking about poverty or homelessness, and kind of coming up with solutions that are sustainable. For me, it's all really exciting because what we're talking about is, especially around social justice right now, it's very much a revolution. And I really like that we're in the middle of that as opposed to just watching it happen. Um, and to me, that's really exciting. Being part of change and being part of challenging injustice and inequities in our communities is really exciting.
I would echo what Jackie said, because we are game changers, whether we like it or not. We have been trained to use certain models and modalities that are evidence-based to work with ourselves, with individuals, our families, our communities, and so on and so forth. And so we can bring some strategies to the table that help be a part of that solution. I would also say that I have also liked the analogy of being a bridge builder. A lot of times we don't realize that we are laying groundwork for those that are coming behind us. And so it's important for us to make sure that we are, in fact, laying foundation groundwork, because sometimes our foundations are not always solid, right? And that's sometimes not our fault. Sometimes we don't know. But when we can allow ourselves to be more firm and make sure that the foundation is solid, we tend to have better outcomes for those that are coming behind us, as well as our own. I would also say that, as Jackie talked about with social justice and just where our country is in terms of the political system, as well as our cultural awareness, there is a lot to be said about how social workers can help in that aspect. We are required and expected to follow a code of ethics from the National Association of Social Workers on ethical values, and dignity and respect of a person is one that I talk to our students about constantly. We know that we have a lot of issues that we're dealing with. We know we have a lot of racial issues that are going on in our own city here, going on in our state and in our country. And there's a lot to be said. And so for me, as an African-American woman, it's important for me to express my concerns, as well as the position that I play with our program, and making sure that all students know that I respect them all, but I want them to understand that they have to learn to be culturally aware of those around them so that they can be good social workers. Because I have gone into many communities working as a social worker where folks did not look like me, I did not look like them. And it was very challenging at times to build the rapport with clients because they don't trust, or I don't feel comfortable because I don't see anyone else that looks like me, right? And so it's really important to have that awareness and dignity and respect of a person in order to work with others and to figure out what those solutions need to be from the client's perspective or the community's perspective. And so I think being a bridge builder is really important. And it's hard. I'm not going to sit here and act like I have a playbook on it. It is very challenging at times. Sometimes you're winging it with a prayer, but you do your best and hope that you aim for the best outcome. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that it's just as important to hit on what your favorite parts of this industry and field is as it is to talk about the challenges. You know, it's career finding and then getting into your career is hard. Like you said, there's no playbook on a lot of the things that people are going to do, especially in your guys' field with such a range of people, because, you know, like you said, you guys are working with everybody. It doesn't matter what they look like, or where they come from, or whatever background they have. You guys are working with such a range of people that it's such an awesome position to be in, to be able to do that, because not everyone gets to do that. And so, yeah, I love that aspect of this field. And I know that my friend who's doing social work is like, that's one of her favorite parts, is being able to be with communities that she necessarily doesn't always interact with. And so I'm glad to hear that's something that's kind of across the board. But I think Serretta kind of hit on this earlier, about kind of misconceptions people might have about your industry or what you guys do. So if you guys would like to speak to some common misconceptions about what you guys actually do, and how you guys try to combat those misconceptions, and communicate that what you do is this and not these myths, or, like I said, misconceptions other people might have.
Hmm. I think Serretta touched on one, especially as it relates to social workers. And I also know that it was the one that my parents attempted to use to steer me clear of social work as a profession. And I think part of it is how social work has been displayed in the media, but also the roles that we end up in early in our career. And Serretta referred to this myth that what social workers do is take children from families, in part because of the Department of Child Services, um, or what we used to also call CPS. Now, that is something that we do, but it's not the social worker that is necessarily removing the children. The social worker in that situation probably sees themselves as the advocate for the child. And I would have to say, in a lot of cases, that's true. That's what we do. We are the advocates. We are the ones that make sure that just general human and civil rights are being given to the people that oftentimes don't understand that they even have rights. And I have found that the biggest myth that I'm typically, or I guess the wrong impression that people have about social work, um, is specifically about the populations of people that we're working with. And I chose to work in the world of addiction and recovery. And because of the media, I think because of the way that we've been socialized to think about alcohol or drug users, or the folks that end up with severe substance use disorders, there's huge stereotypes and myths about um, people that become addicted. And I would have to say that when I tell people that I work in addiction, they're like, well, why would you do that? Uh, and the reality is I love it. I have a passion for it. And I think that those struggling with addiction or in recovery are widely misunderstood because of stereotypes and because of um, policies put in place way before us, that were used to marginalize people even more, um, are really what I feel like I'm battling against every day. And we've made huge strides, don't get me wrong, but I still feel like sometimes it's an uphill battle to educate the public and almost influence them to be advocates with us, whether it's in their pocketbook or through employment or wherever it may be. I feel like that's always been and probably always will be a struggle for me in my chosen profession.
So for me, there are two things that stand out for me. As I mentioned, when you go through college and you start to explore different degrees and you think about social work, you are definitely going to be challenged to explore yourself. Any undergrad program should be allowing and encouraging and demanding for you to do some self-inventory. And so when I decided at the age of 25, when I went back to college, to become a social worker, the first thing that I recognized was that, gosh, I have a lot of family issues that have never really been brought to the surface. And although I've gotten help for them, the people around me haven't. And so when I said I'm going to go back to school and get a degree in social work, there were a lot of, really strong opinions around me. Why would you want to do that? You won't make any money. All you're going to do is expose people around you, and you're going to be telling people what's wrong with them, and all these different things. And so again, self-inventory is so important, because once you allow yourself to know who you are, it won't matter what the naysayers say to you. You know that you have to push forward. But I think also in terms of just thinking about this message to high school students, as you start to really evolve as an individual and as an adult, you will start to recognize what kind of lifestyle you want and what kind of purpose and impression you want to leave on the world. When you take your last breath, what do you want for those around you to say about you? And even though it doesn't matter what they think, it is important for you to leave a mark in this world. And so part of that meant that I went in head first knowing that I may not make any money. I went in knowing that I'm probably going to end up having to be exposed for some of the things that I've seen in my family structure. It also meant that I'm going to lose some relationships because I want to be healthy and I want my life and my family to be healthy. And so When you tell someone they won't make any money, I tell them now, oh, yes, I do. And it's not always about the money, but I'm all right. And so you have to be able to recognize that it's not always about putting a dollar amount on what you're making and bringing home every month or every year. It's about you living in your purpose, and social work allows you to do that as long as you are willing to do it. There's so many different levels of social work that you can be in private practice and have a major company or organization where you are working in the community, writing grants and getting a lot of funding, and still being able to provide for your family in a very well way. You can also work for a major community mental health organization and do that just as well in terms of working in leadership. You don't always have to be working in micro levels. You can be working at a higher level. For me, I realized that not only was I a great social worker, but I was a great administrator, which meant that I don't do the micro level work as much anymore with individuals in terms of, I work with students, but I am really good at administration. So it's really important for us to recognize that there are different levels of social work. And once you start to do your own self-inventory, you start to recognize where your strengths lie, and you're able to get in there and do that. And so I think for me, those were some myths that I took in personally and really had to evaluate and figure out, okay, Serretta, what do you want to do with these messages from the people who love you, but they're afraid because they don't know how you're going to sustain, how you're going to take care of yourself. And I look back from the time that I started my degree until now in this profession, and I'm glad that I took this route. It has not been the easiest, but I do think that those myths, those opinions challenge me to be better. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, great to hear both sides of that. I think Jackie hit some really great points about stigmas around populations that you guys work with or may work with. And then also, Serretta, I really like your point of kind of the individual aspect of it and the misconceptions that people close to you may be pushing onto you about the field, whether it's about money or what you're going to experience there. And I think you make a really great point of kind of finding where you fit. You know, like you said, you found that you were better at this, so you went ahead and did this. And I think that's something really important for up and coming high school students to really like know and understand, is that social work isn't just this. It's so many levels, like you both kind of hinted at, that you can get into, and you can kind of find what fits best for you. So we're just going to finish with pretty much one more question and then leave the last kind of few minutes if you guys want to speak on anything else. I think really the last thing I want to hit on is both of you guys have been in this field for a good amount of time. How has your field or industry changed in the past 5 years? And where do you see it going from here? And Jackie kind of hit on the technology thing. So if you want to expand on that, that's great. Or whatever you guys kind of see from your past 5 years in the field and where you see it going.
That's a big one. Goodness. Really thinking about that. Yeah.
I'm just going to say the first thing that comes to my mind, because there's so many things that I feel like in 5 years are smaller changes than if you really look back at, for example, like the last 20 since the year 2000. And I think for me, that is the emphasis on trauma, and also, for example, generational trauma, or and part of the reason I say that is because I was an undergrad when 9/11 happened, and the anniversary is coming up. So every year I remember what I was like or how I felt that day that it happened. And it feels like in the last 5 years or so, we're talking about trauma so much more than we did before. I think social workers have always paid attention to trauma, and we focus on the evidence-based interventions that help with trauma or help people recover from it. But just from my perspective, it has become a Oh, what's the word? I guess trauma is the lens through which I can see people that I'm working with. And it's seen more, I think, in the profession as a cause or a correlation between the suffering that people experience. And I don't know exactly what I'm getting at, but I think that one, we live in a culture and a society that is so much more prepared or anticipates, for example, acts of terrorism or violence. Um, but then also we live in this new era of what it was like for most Americans to experience terrorism on our own, in our own country. And for a lot of us, it was the first time something that huge has happened. But I also want to say, like, the impact of Hurricane Katrina and natural disasters are also, I feel like I'm hearing about them more, and I'm more and more meeting people that have been displaced by natural disasters. And the term trauma informed care was not necessarily something that I remember learning about in my college years. However, I knew that I read about it, and it just seems that more and more people are embracing that perspective. And also, it's not just about how we view the world, but it's also how we treat people. You know, I'm going to address somebody with trauma a little bit differently than I would somebody without identified trauma, but now it feels like I'm treating everybody like they have trauma, in part because that's the perspective that I hold, that you never know what somebody has been through, and that trauma looks different for different people. And I also think that we're seeing some issues in social justice as historical trauma, which to me is really important, especially when dealing with populations that are different than, for example, my own culture or my own skin color. I just think it's really valuable. I think in the next 5 years, we are going to become much more, I think, receptive to alternatives in addictions treatment in particular. For a long time, abstinence-based treatment has been the most important or widely accepted method of treatment. And I feel like because of the opioid crisis, we're all embracing different forms of treatment and recognizing that any positive change is a good change. It does not have to 100% be abstinent if that's not what's going to work for somebody. But also, we can't afford to be so rigid in our beliefs and approach, especially during the opioid crisis, where people are literally losing their lives, which means that they cannot get help if they're no longer with us. So from my perspective in addictions treatment, that I think we've already become more flexible, but I think it's going to become even more so in the next few years.
Wow, Jackie, you took all of my points, which is just fine. You hit on everything. What I would say is that Jackie's absolutely right. There are so many different angles to this thing. But a couple of things that come to mind for me in terms of field education, working at a major university, is that we are seeing more schools open up social work programs, which means that social work is evolving. We have online programs as well as face-to-face. We have hybrid. We have students that are doing block programs where they're doing classes and practicum all at the same time. There's a lot of different opportunities depending on what school you go to and what your undergrad degree is in, if you're getting a master's or if you're getting an undergrad degree and how you want to go full-time, part-time. There's a lot of options. But I know for field education, we are seeing a lot more programs popping up throughout this region. And because of that, we're being more competitive because we have to make sure that we're kind of fighting for our placements and saying, hey, we want IU students to definitely be first choice if we can. But we also play well in the sand with other schools too. We are a part of consortiums where we are working together. I have a meeting this afternoon with the University of Michigan field coordinator to just talk about their program. And so there's a lot of collegial work going on. But I would say from an educational standpoint in terms of field and the social work profession, we're seeing more programs pop up, which means that there is a need. And so all the things that Jackie just talked about in terms of the roles that we play, we are hopeful to see not only what's happened 5 years ago till now, but 5 years later, how those students that graduate in the next couple of years will be jumping into those roles, as well as students that are coming through now. So we're excited about it, and we're hopeful to just keep seeing more students get into the profession.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see where the psychology and social work field go. I agree with both of your points, and especially Jackie's point about